All right, so previously we set this up so that when we hit play, we randomly generate the walls to a new room, right? And the way that we've organized this, the room, um, there's a room game object that gets made, and then the walls become children of that room. Now, this makes our life a lot easier when it comes to destroying the room and destroying these clones. Because the way we've done things here, where we've made these different lists, we're actually, you notice, we're not putting clones in these lists. We're actually putting our assets in these lists. And if we try and go through and destroy each one of the walls in a similar way to how we instantiated them, it's actually going to try to destroy our assets in our assets folder, which would delete them from the project. And fortunately, Unity won't let you do that. It gives you a big warning before you try and do that. And there's a special, if you need to ever delete an asset, there is a special destroy immediate, and basically you can say, yes, you can delete assets. That might be good if you have like save states or things for your players and you want to, delete a save state, or they want to delete a save state. That's the way you can do that. But that's not what we want to do. We don't want to delete our wall assets. We just want to delete the instances that are being displayed currently. And so by having this room that we're creating on the fly, we can then destroy the room and all of its children will be destroyed as well. So let's go ahead and get that code started, because that being able to destroy it is a key element of being able to, before we go forward any further. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And right now we're just going to implement this so we hit the space bar and the walls disappear. And we'll leave that way for a little bit until we get a little further along. So when we create this room, right, currently there's no tag applied to this, right? We have the name, but with Unity, you can't search. If I type in game object, and if I spell it right, if I even just type in game and go to game object and go through all of these options, right, there's all sorts of different things. We can create a new game object with a name, but if we're searching for trying to find a game object, I guess we can find it by name as well, but we can also find objects or an object with a tag. And so it really just depends on which one we want to do. And I think we should probably go ahead and use tag, because we're going to potentially be creating multiple rooms and they may have different names, but they may all have that same tag. And so what we need to do is we're going to need to add a tag to this object, right? Because we've created it, but it currently has no tag. And so I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to say add unit, and I'm going to say game object, and I'm going to say dot tag, and then I can either get a tag or I can set a tag. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the set, and I'm going to temporarily break this. I'm going to make my flow go through here. And the object that I want to set the tag on isn't the game manager, right? That's going to destroy everything if we do that. I want to make sure I connect this here. So it's the room is the game object that we're doing this to. And then the tag I'm going to use is, we could also just do uppercase ROOM. Now, if I clear my errors real quick and run this, you'll see that we don't have a room tag yet. Like, we haven't defined one. So if I play this, the room does draw correctly, and I don't get an error anywhere. However, down here, I get this room tag room is not defined. And if I select my room object that's been generated in my hierarchy and come over here, you'll see it says untagged. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And then I'm going to go and select any object in my scene. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to go to where it says untagged. I'm going to select add tag, and I'm going to add capital ROOM and hit save. So, and I had one here and I removed it, right? Which is why it's got that removed set. So now I have this room tag that exists, and now I can actually set this correctly. So if I go to my console and I clear it, go to my flow graph, and if I hit play, one, I shouldn't get that error, and then two, I can always double check and make sure it actually was applied to this object. So if I select this object, right, now the tag is room. So fantastic, that worked. So how are we going to destroy this? Let's go ahead and we're going to hold down Option, and I'm going to pull this way down over here because I'm running out of space up top, and this is a good spot for it. So let's go ahead and do an on keyboard input. So I'll just say on key, and I'm going to leave it just as the space key. And then what I need to do is the next thing I need to do is I need to find this object, right? Because the room is being generated on the fly. It's not an instance of a prefab. It's just being created in code. And so I need to be able to find that thing without pulling in like a variable or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say game object and dot find. And if I just even do dot fi, right, I can go by name. I can find with tag. Or I can say find game object with tag, right? The result is a game object, right? And I honestly don't know what the difference is between these two. But let's go ahead and say, okay, find game object with tag. And then the tag that I want to use is, right, capital ROOM. And what I need to do is before I go to destroy this, there's a chance that when I hit the space bar, there may not be a room object, right? If I've hit the space bar once and destroyed it, and then hit the space bar again, it's gonna give me an error because I'm gonna be sending a null, right? If there's no game object that is found in this search, then what I get is a null. And so we need to do a null check. So I'm gonna click on the game object here. I'm gonna click again. I'm gonna type in null, and I'm gonna click on null check. And I'm going to connect my flow here. And if it's not null, then I'm going to click, and I'm just going to say destroy. And what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to wait to destroy this object, right? So I'm going to select this, and the game object I'm going to want to destroy, right? Whatever had the room tag needs to be the object that's destroyed. And let's just set the time to 3 seconds. And the reason that we're going to want to wait when we actually implement this in our code is, right, because we don't want the character is going to be still in the room that we're about to destroy, but we want it to stay on screen long enough that we have time to transition to the new room but we basically want to transition to the new room before that old room disappears. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this and see if we can destroy a room. And honestly, this is the second time I've done this, and it's so much more efficient than the way I was doing this previously. So, right, okay, the room's been generated. Now if I hit the space bar and wait 3 seconds, the room should disappear. So there it goes, right? Room was there, and now it's gone. Okay, so we have got the basics of the room code, right? A way to disappear the room that we currently have. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to disconnect this for now because I don't want to accidentally hit the space bar and destroy the room that we're potentially in. So I've just disconnected that, but our code is still here, so we can reuse it in a little bit. Okay, so the next part in this tutorial is going to be a little bit of housekeeping, specifically with our wall objects. So there's a couple things that we've done that I did that were mistakes and that need to be changed. So first, right, we had created these as collisions on collision stay, right, which means that there's a collider where the object hits the surface and stops, right? The player could not go through any of the doorways. We don't want that to be the case. And in fact, a much better way of working would be to have the doorways be triggers, but then if we want the player not to be able to have access through that doorway, we could essentially put a door, some sort of physical barrier that has a collider on it in front of it, And then once some room cleared state gets hit, like say every enemy unit is destroyed, then the doorways, the blocks disappear and the character can go through and trigger the change to the next room. And so let's go ahead and fix that. And there's a couple different things we actually need to fix. So first, let's go ahead and just fix this in the graph. So you want to select any one of your walls. I'm going to start with East and just click on Edit Graph. And then right click and say Add Unit. And we're going to say On Trigger. And we want On Trigger Stay 2D. Right? And then we're just going to basically replace these two things. So I'm going to move my collider up here. And I'm going to make the flow connect over here. And then delete the flow and delete this. Right? So now we're looking for a trigger. However, right, if you remember, there's a little checkbox is trigger on all of our colliders, which means that we're going to need to make sure we're setting this trigger to be a trigger and not a collider. And so that means we're going to have to go into each one of these objects individually and fix that. Now, the other issue is that the trigger that this is looking for, currently the game object is self. And if we're in this east wall object, if I click Open Prefab, right, there are no triggers or colliders on our main east wall object. It's only on the east entry. Now, the issue is that each one of these is named differently. And honestly, if I gave them all the same name entry, it might work. But it's also kind of a headache. What would be easier is just taking this flow machine and actually placing it on the east entry rather than the entire wall. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to first start by unchecking flow machine on my main object. Then I'm going to come over here. I'm just going to say copy component. I'm going to come down to my east entry and I'm going to click on the last set of ellipses here and just say paste component as new. And now I've got my flow machine. I'm going to make sure I turn it back on. And honestly, I might just go ahead and copy this component again with that check marked so that I don't have to do that step the next time. And then I just need to come in here and check mark is trigger. Then I'm done editing that unit. So I'm going to go ahead and I've done the east wall. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select my north wall. I'm going to uncheck the flow machine. I'm going to open the prefab. I'm going to I'm going to select my entry. I am going to paste component as new, and I'm going to check mark is trigger, and I'll just make sure that that is in fact enabled. It is. So after I've done the north wall, I'm going to pop out. I'm going to go to the south wall. I'm going to uncheck my flow machine. I'm going to open my prefab. I'm going to paste component as new. And, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to undo that. Sorry. I'm going to select my south entry. I'm going to go ahead and paste component as new. That's good. I'm going to check mark is trigger. I'm going to pop back out of this. And then I'm going to select my west wall finally. I'm going to uncheck that flow machine. I'm going to open the prefab, select my west entry, is trigger, and then go ahead and paste component as new. Okay, so now these all have graphs, and that should all be set up. And these should now be triggers rather than something else. Now, how are we going to test that these triggers are working quickly? So down here we have this destroy option. And so let's go ahead and I'm going to right click, I'm going to click delete. And so we're going to go ahead and create what I just deleted, but let's go ahead and say custom event, right? And this isn't the trigger, this is the actual custom event. And let's go ahead and type in entry collide, right? Which was our, what we called it. And then we want one argument, right? And that's because we're going to be using the tag from the entry that we're hitting in order to tell us what direction to build the new room. So we're going to go ahead and connect this here. We don't need this argument attached right now because all we're doing, and this is in the game manager, right? We're basically going to destroy the walls if we go through one of these entries. So let's go ahead and see if this is working. Okay, so here goes Bob, and I'm just going to go through this top one so you can actually see him still on the screen. Okay, so I've gone through that top thing. Let's see if anything happens. Okay, it's been about 3 seconds and the walls are still there. So what's the problem? So the problem is that these custom events have a game object they're associated with, right? And so entry collide is a custom event for my game manager, and there's an entry collide custom event for the colliders in my walls. And those are not the same thing. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure they're the same thing. Now, one way I could do that is I could say, oh, well, I want these to be these different entries. But those are all going to be clones. They're going to be, being recreated and deleted, and the name's not going to be the same. And that's going to potentially be really problematic. Plus, it's really messy to have, multiple potential inputs or all this code 4 times over in order to check for these events from the different things. What's easier is if in the graph for our doorways, we could actually say, oh, the game manager is the object that this entry collide custom event is on, because then we just put it in one place. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is, in order to do that, let's go to our project. Let's select one of our walls and click Edit Graph. And what we need is, right, we've already talked about different ways to find game objects. Now, if there were a bunch of game manager objects, maybe we'd just want to tag one a special way, but we're going to just be finding this by name because there should only be one game manager ever created in our hierarchy. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click, we're going to say add unit, and we are going to say game object.fin. And the very first one is game object find name. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and type the name in here, which is game manager, and you want to make sure your capitalization and spelling is accurate. And so now what I'm going to do is, right, I need to use this as the, right, instead of self, the game object that this should be attached to is my game manager. So I'm just going to go ahead and plug that in there. Now, I shouldn't need the flow to run through here because it should automatically be triggered here. If it's not, we'll figure it out. Okay, so now it's going to basically trigger the game manager's custom event. And so if I go back to game manager and I've got my custom event connected to here and it's entry collide, let's go ahead and see if we actually can disappear some walls. Okay, so I've got 2 options. I'm going to take the south option. Oh, and you saw that happen. And so let's give it a second and the walls disappear. So fantastic. So now we've got something where when we exit through the walls or through the doors, we disappear the room. And so now we just need to make sure that we not only disappear the room, but that we also create a new room and move the camera along with it. Now, what we need to do with that is order is going to be really important. If we create a new room first, and then destroy this with the tag, that's problematic. What we need to do is we'll want to destroy the existing room, right? And that's why we have this time here, is so that it can stay on screen for a bit while we create the new room that will have the same tag. So the next time we exit, we get to reuse the same code. Okay, so now for the fun part. We need to generate a new room when the character moves to an entry, and we need to make sure we generate it in the right order and that our camera position also gets updated. And so the first thing we're going to want to do, because what we're going to do is we're going to be using the camera's, basically the position the camera would move to as the center or the origin point for our room object when we generate that object and all the walls within it. And so what we need to do is let's go ahead and write some code or make a graph that's going to update our camera's position when we go through one of these entries or exits. So what we want to do is I'm going to create a scene level variable for the camera's position in the, and I'm just going to make it an XY, a vector 2, right? Granted, the camera also has a Z, but we're not going to be too worried about that. And so what we're going to call this is, we'll just call this camera XY, and actually I should make that new camera XY. And what we want is, we want this to be a vector2 object. Okay, so we're going to have this new camera XY, and we might as well, it might be good to have a current camera XY as well, just to make our life easier. So I'm just going to say current cam XY, and we'll go ahead and make that as well. Right, and these, these should both be set to 0 for now. And so what we're going to do is, whenever this event happens, the first thing we want to do is we want to set our current cam's X and Y values. So we're going to go ahead and hold down, I'm going to click in my graph, I'll hold down Option, click and drag this in so I can set this variable. And what I want this to set this to is, I want to go ahead and pull my camera in here. So that's something else that we're going to want as a scene variable, is our camera. And so we can just say camera and plus, and then let's go ahead and grab, and let's make this, instead of a game object, which would work, but we're just going to, we'll make it a camera. That would potentially allow us to do other things with this as well if we needed to. But for now, main camera, drag this down, drop it in, and I'm just going to pull this into my graph. I'm going to say get camera, and then I'm just going to say transform.position and get. And I should just be able to feed this in here, and we should get the XY position updated. Right, and so, this is step 1, and this, all of this camera position stuff should happen probably before we even delete the existing room. Right, we should just make sure we have our current camera position. So we've got our current camera position set. So now what we need to do is we need to set our future, or our new camera position. So I'm going to hold down, I'm going to click in my graph, deselect everything in there, hold down Option, click and drag. And for some reason that didn't work, so I'm going to hold down Option, click and drag again. There we go. All right, because we're going to need to set our new camera XY position. So how are we going to do that? So this is where this argument comes in, right? Where we have a string coming through that's either going to be north, south, east, or west. And depending on whether we get north, south, east, or west is going to change whether or not we move the camera up, left, left, right, or down, right? So let's go ahead and bring this in. And what are we going to use to do this? Well, we're going to say control. And what we want to do is we want to use switch on string. So I'm going to click that. And when I have switch on string selected, I'm going to come up here to my graph inspector, and I'm going to add 4 slots. The first one is going to be north. And for some reason, I found that with this, it pops out of the field after I type one letter. I don't know why. So I'm going to say north. See, same thing. East. And I have to click in the field again for some reason. South. And west. That's a really strange bug, and this is the only unit that I have found this happening to. So I could check mark ignore case, which would actually mean that even if I made a mistake here in capitalization, it would work, but I'm going to leave it here. So the question is, okay, so what do we do if it's north, east, south, or west? Well, if we double click so we can see this, right, our camera is currently situated at 0, 0. And we know that it's 7 units from our camera to the edge of the frame. So to get to the center of the next frame that we would want, we actually want to move 14 units. So let's go ahead and say plus 14, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to say if north is our answer, let's actually just go ahead and connect this to this variable. And we're going to say, all right, well, we need to get, we need to use our current xy, which is, oh, sorry. So we need to go to our scene variables. We need to grab our current cam xy, right? Because we should have, through this part that we haven't connected to the graph yet. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and connect this through here, right? We're going to set that variable, and then we're going to come over to this switch. And there may be other things we need to do in here, but right. So we're going to make sure that our scene variable, our camera position, current camera position is set. So we're going to get our current camera position in the XY. And what we need to do is we just need to add a new vector 2 with XY values. And we know how big our frame is. Now, we could create a variable and have some fancy math so that if we change our aspect ratio and stuff, we can dynamically update it. Not going to do that right now. We're just going to leave it at 16.9. And so I know this needs to be positive 14 units. And nothing's going to happen in the Y. And so then I just need to add these two things together. So I just click right over here and I say add. And I want to say add vector 2 just to make sure it's correct. And then whatever that is going to get dropped in here in my new camera XY position. Right? And at this point, we're not updating the camera position yet. We're just setting the variable that we will then use later to update that position. Okay, so this is if we do north, and you can tell that this is going to get pretty hairy down here. So I'm going to go ahead and scoot these over. Now you'll also note that there are that this is something that's going to happen over and over and over again. So this might be a really great time for a super unit because we're going to be entering in these things over and again. But this is also really small, so what I might do is I might just copy and paste this. So remember, so it's north. So then with east, let's go ahead and connect this over. And so if we're moving east, we're definitely not going any direction in the X. Oh, shoot. This should be in the Y. That would have been a huge mistake. So let's change this. So, so this should be 0 in the X because X is left and right and Y is north and south or up and down. So it should be 14 in the Y. This east should be in the X direction. And we want it to be 24.88 or something like that, or 24.889 would probably work. Let's go ahead and do that. The closer we are, the less little drift and wiggle we'll see, and people most likely won't notice it over time, because there's going to be an accumulation of error, but it doesn't really matter in this example. Okay, so that's if we're going east, which is this direction, so that should be positive. If I forget what direction is positive, I can just, select anything really and click the arrows and say, okay, that's positive in the X, this is positive in the Y. So if I'm going west, south, which is the next one, I need to copy this first chunk. And you can see, this is getting big and ugly. This is why superunits might be nice. If you want to create superunits, obviously you do so. So I'm going to say south, and I'm going to connect this over here. And then I'm going to double click and zoom in. And so now if I'm going south, this should be a negative 14. And then if I am going west, we're going to copy this section here one more time. Paste it and connect west and go down here and hit negative. Now, we also have this default option. And honestly, if something crazy comes through here, through this, we don't want to do anything with that. So it's best just to leave that disconnected. Oh, and I connected this to the wrong thing. So let's go ahead and actually connect west to the setting of this variable. Okay, So now we've got this switch going through, right? And we're setting our scene variables depending on which option comes through. So we should probably go ahead and test this and make sure that this part is working, right? We're not going to destroy anything because that's not connected currently. So let's go ahead and see what happens. So I'm going to double click to get out of there. I'm going to bridge this. And what should happen is the camera frame should snap somewhere else despite where Bob is. Okay, so I have two options to go through. So let's go south and see what happens. Now, once I go back north, oh, okay, so nothing happened there. That's great because we don't actually have the camera being changed. But if I go to my scene variable, you'll see that my new camera XY is X is 0, Y is negative 14, right? And my current camera XY, Z is negative 10, and for some reason it made it a vector 3. Maybe I dropped that in there on accident. It doesn't really matter because it seems to work, right? The current is 0, 0. That's where it's at right now. Okay, so that's working. So let's go ahead and try and update our camera position. Now, right, we've got all of these objects, and we need these paths to come together for the next step. So let's go ahead and to start with, we're just going to hop our camera over there. What would be nice is actually to have an interpolation thing happen so that it moves over as we go, and it might be good to have that script on our camera itself, but just for testing's sake, let's go ahead and have it pop over. So what we're going to do is we are going to say, we're going to pull our camera in here, and then we're going to say add unit transform dot position and set. And we want this to be the object that we are setting. And then we want our new camera XY to be the position we are setting it to. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull this in because we need a get, not a set. Remember, things go crazy if you actually use those outputs. And now the issue is, right, I have these 4 different options here that need to be connected. So I'm just going to say no matter which branch we're on, right, no matter what has happened, we want them all to coalesce in one place, which is to transform the camera. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if this works. Now, one of the issues is because you'll see what happens, and we'll talk about it. But okay, so great. I have all 4 options in this room. So if I go over here and I come down, okay, you see I disappear there, and my camera is nowhere to be found. And that may be because I need to change the type of collision that's happening. Let's go ahead and, or the type of trigger that's happening, because as I'm staying on that trigger, it's probably triggering the camera several times. And so, right, this should only have one option, but the issue is that as I move through this, right, I'm pulsing several times. So let's go ahead and fix that in our script on our wall. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to click Edit Graph. And, you know, I should have probably just did Enter. So let's go ahead and say, oops, right-click. And actually, we can just replace this. So right-click, Replace. On Trigger and 2D, Enter. Okay, so now let's go back to our Game Manager over here, and let's run this, and let's see what happens. Okay, so I've got 3 options. So, and let's go ahead and select our camera, and select the axis, the Move tool, so we can watch the axis move. So we're going to come down here, and there we go. We've popped over. Now, if I go back, it's still going to add negative 14, right? If I come back through here, right, it's going to do another negative 14 because that's what we've set this to, right? Because ideally, this room disappears and a new room generates, and then we would be going through the north entry rather than the south entry. So we just want to make sure that we have that at least this is working, right? So we know that it's going south. But if I go through here, it should bump up one. And if I actually move back and bump up again, it should do it a second time. Now, we might need a flag at some point that says the character can't enter the trigger twice. But, right now we're not going to worry about that. So, okay, so that works. If I go back through, right, it disappears because it's actually one further over. And if I was to go through one of these and then go through another one, it should actually, right, pop it up there as well, right, because this is cumulative. And so you can imagine, right, it's going to be generating these random rooms kind of all over this empty space. And they're going to be disappearing quickly as well. And the way we're doing this, we're not keeping track of where the entries are. So if we end up back over here, there may not be an entry back to this room, right? You can imagine this as some sort of imaginary dream-like maze that never ends. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And great, so we've got our camera moving. So now we need to be able to generate a new room. And this graph here is actually not turned on. It was something I was testing, so ignore that. We don't need to worry about that at all right now. We may use that in the future. Okay, so, and that was basically camera follow is what that was. Okay, so we've got all of this. So let's go ahead and, lump all of these together somewhat. This is like a huge graph, but that's all right. So we can, put all of this together and just call this, update camera position, which may be what we do is we can leave these out of that just to make our life easier. I'm going to scoot this in some, and I'm just going to select these 3 units, pull them in a little bit closer too, and then just hold down command, click and drag, and name this group. There we go. Update. Okay. So I've misspelled position, but that's fine, right? So we're going to be updating our camera position. Okay. So we've got this done. So we've set up our position for our camera. Great. So now what we need to do is probably the next step in this chain is going to be to find the existing room and delete it, right? We're going to set it up so that it will disappear at a certain point. Okay. So we're going to disappear the room, and then we need to go through and do our generation. Now, something we might want to do is create a variable that's going to be a string variable called last entry, so I don't have to drag a wire all the way across over there. So this is just going to be, and let's go ahead and make it an object variable. So if we need to check it for debugging, we can. And so I'm going to go ahead and call this last entry. I'm going to hit plus. I am in my object variables tab, and I want to make it a string object. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put a space in this value field, because I found that if there's nothing in there, it thinks it's null and it resets it, and it's pretty aggravating. Okay, so I've created this. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down. I've clicked off in space in my graph. I'm going to hold Option, click and drag, and I'm going to say set this variable. Oops, for some reason it brought it in as a get. Hold down Option, click and drag. It says set. Let's see if, yeah, it is. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this in here. Now, what I want to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and put this in the chain here so that all of this happens before we get too far. Oh, and I made a mistake there, right? I was orange to orange, right? This is the name of the variable. We want that to stay. This is the value of the variable. So let's go ahead and put that in there. And this is a good moment to save the work that we've been doing. Okay, so now let's go ahead and come on over here. Okay, so now we need to remember how we're generating this room. So the first thing we're doing up here is, right, we're creating this new object called room with the tag room. And then we are going through choosing our different walls and generating our wall list. And then over here, we're checking to see if there's an entry. Now, we're going to do, everything is going to be exactly the same until we get to basically this point. And this is where we're going to, it's so much easier to then just overwrite whatever wall we need to overwrite. So let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to grab everything here, including that start, just because it's in the way. I'm going to grab all of that. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to drag this all down over here, right? This is an enormous graph, by the way, but it'll work. Now, I could make this a super unit as well, because it is something I'm using over and over again, and it's big, but I'm trying to keep things as clear, at least on the top level, as possible. Okay, so we're going to destroy this object. Then we're going to come over here and connect into our thing. Now, the issue is that, right, we're creating the room and we're setting the tag, but when the room is created, it's going to be created at the origin at 0, 0, 0. And what we want to do is we want this to be created at the new camera position. So let's go ahead and grab that variable, which I believe is a scene level variable. So I'm going to pull my scroll up, click scene, right? And so we have our new camera XY. So I'm going to go ahead and drag, I'm going to go ahead and drag this in. And what I want to do is this game object that I'm working with here, which is over here and set there. I could, add this to a variable as well. I could set some variable to this, and that might make my life easier, but I think this is really the last reference I need to this object. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to say transform.position, and I want to set my position, and the position I want to set this to, right, is my new camera XY. And I'm going to go ahead and drag this over. Now, the reason we're not just setting this to the position of the camera, like grabbing the camera object and setting it there, is because this is like our camera's goal, right? And so if we want to be able to animate the camera sliding between these two, we don't want these walls to generate wherever the camera happens to be in that linear interpolation between these 2 points. And so we want to make sure that the walls generate where we want the walls to generate, and then the camera stops in the center of that space, right? And so that's why this is set like this. Okay, so we want this to be generated wherever this is generated, and then, right, so we're coming down here, right, we generate all of our current walls, and now we're going to need to use that tag that we got to figure out what wall we're going to be placing where. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish this up. We're getting really close, which is pretty exciting. And so now, right, we've got everything to generate a new room, however, at a new position. However, we need to make sure that we don't block the entry that we use to get into that room, right? So if I'm going south and I'm going through this entry south, and the code that I create, the graph that I create, randomly generates a solid wall on the north, then I'm just going to run straight into that wall, and I'm not going to be able to get into the room that I just walked through. And so we need a way to test for that. And so we've already got some of that down. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to come over to this update camera position. And right, the two things that I'm eventually going to need is this, right? I'll need my last entry variable, which we can just pull out of our list. But then I've already created this piece of code that's going to help me generate those walls, and that's this switch on string. And because I don't want to have to type all of these out again, I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And then I'm going to come over to the far end of this graph, right? And this thing is getting huge. And so let's go ahead and come over to this far end of the graph here next to generate wall list, and let's paste this unit. And so what we're going to want to do is, right, we've made our list, and then we're going to need to check, once we've made the list, we're just going to be overwriting one of those options with, the opening from a previous, that we went through in the previous example. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to have this switch, and we are going to need to get our last entry variable, which for me is an object variable. It's down here. I'm going to go ahead and drag this thing into my thing, and I'm going to feed this in as my input. Right, so I'm feeding this in, and I'm saying, okay, well, there's north, east, south, and west are my 4 options. And so what do I want to do with each of these flows? So the thing I want to do if I walked out the north door, then I'm going to want to overwrite the south, whatever's in the south entry. If I walked out the east door, I'm going to want to do the west, right? And if I'm going out the south door, it should be north, and west should be east. So we need to switch some things around, and we need to do that. Now, let's go ahead and, we already have this get variable here for our current walls. This is the list that we're going to want to be updating, right? But what we need first is we need to, let's go ahead and kind of work backwards. The thing we want to do is we want to set a list item, right? So I'm going to come in here to add unit. I'm going to go to collections, lists, and set list item, right? And so the list item needs the list that I'm setting the item to, the index of that item, and what item I want to use. So the list is here. It's this current walls, right? Because I just set that over here. So I'm going to make that the list that I'm using. And then I need the index and the item. Now, I'm going to manually set the index. So I'm going to say, okay, well, the north is, this is the north flow. And what I want is the south index, right? And if we think about how these are set up, right, our indices are right here. There's 0, 1, 2, and 3, and it's north, east, south, and west. So this should be an index of 2 because I want to overwrite the south wall. And the item that I'm going to put in there is the south wall. So the south wall entry. So what I can do, the simplest thing I can do here is just to grab my south wall list, and I can click here and click again, and I can say collections, first item, right? Because I know that the entry is my first item in all of these lists. And so I'm going to go ahead and use first item, and I'm going to bring this in and drop it in there. Okay, and this is the code that I'm going to need to do for each of these 4 options. All right, so I'm going to try and compress these as much as possible. Again, I could use a super unit, but I'm not going to right now because honestly, there's a lot of things that would need to be, I don't know if I'd actually save any space because of all the changes that need to happen for this super unit to be a thing. But I am going to pull this up higher so it's easier to see. And I am going to copy and paste this. And then for this next set, I'm going to say, okay, east. And I know that east is 1 and west is 3, so I want to change this to 3. And then I want to just change this variable to the west wall list, right? Because I've organized these, right, the same in every case, this should work out pretty well. So now to do south, it doesn't really matter. I can just go ahead and paste. Oops, well, I just copied, I thought I just pasted it. Nope. Let me go ahead and select nothing and hit paste. Come over here, and so south is my next option. And I'm going to say current walls, but I want this to be the north wall list. And then I want my index to be 0, right? Because north is 0. In my list, it's the first item. Oops. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste this one more time. And I'm going to go down to west. And my index should be 1 because east is 1. And I'm going to say, okay, I want this to be my east wall list. Okay, right? So if we came in again, let's just walk through our logic one more time so we don't make a mistake here. So if I come in through the north, I want to go out. If I walked out through the north, I want to come in through the south. And my index is 2, which should be correct. If I walk out the east door, I should come in the west door in the next room. All right, if I walk out the south, I should come in the north. And if I walk out the west, I should come in the east. Okay, so now all of those things are happening. So now we need to get to our code where we're going to be instantiating what we're working on. Now, this might actually be a place to make this a super unit so that things are a lot nicer to look at on our graph, right? So what I'm going to suggest is that we take our last entry object, all these other variables, everything in here, and we select all of this. Because what we're going to do is we'll basically have one flow in. We're going to connect all of these to the output. So we just have one flow out when we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this. And then I'm going to right click. I'm going to say add unit, super unit, double click on that to zoom in. And then click edit graph over here. I am going to stretch these out because this graph is huge, and I'm just going to paste it. And so for input, all I want to say is all I really need is flow in. Okay, and I don't need any value inputs whatsoever, right? Everything is happening in here. And the only reason we're making this super unit is just to make our graph a little bit nicer to look at. And so for my output, again, I'm setting all the variables in here. So all I need is control out, and I'm just going to say flow out as my output name. That says I didn't completely, oh, that's an input. Let's get that out of there. Subtract that. What I wanted to do was this output. Here we go. So flow out. Let's try that. Okay. Oh, and it looks like I deleted flow in. So I just, something was not where it was supposed to be. Okay, so let's go ahead and connect this to there. Disconnect that. There we go. Now she's happy. Okay, and then let's just go ahead and connect our outputs of all of these set items in here so we can have our flow continue when we get back. So I'm going to go back to my game manager. Now I've got this super unit, and I'm going to call this update. I don't even know what the good name for it is, but update list for exit. Something like that. That makes no sense. You could give it a better summary than I just did. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually have my flow come down here. I'm leaving everything here because if this doesn't work, I might want to make some adjustments. And I'm just going to pull this up here so that I have space to do the next thing that needs to happen. So now I need to instantiate all of those walls. So I'm going to go back over to my initial code. And I am going to go ahead and say, okay, well, I've got my variable here, I've got this, and I've got this, and I'm going to copy these three things. And you'll note there's this parent here that I need to make sure I know, right? Room is the parent, so I want to make sure that that gets copied over. And but I'm going to go down, and I want to make sure that I am updating my position here. Right, so I've updated I update my camera position down here. But let's see here. And I use that position to set the position of the room, I think. Yes, okay, here it is. Jeez. So I use that position to set the position of the room. And then I go in and do all of these things. So that means that I should just be able to right click and, paste what I've copied and say, okay, here are my pieces. This is going to flow in here. That's the variable that I reset one of the walls in, potentially. I'm going to come through here. The body is going to come in here. And now I just need my parent, right, which is my room game object, which is over here. I'm going to zoom out a touch. And again, I could create a variable to house this, or I could just be lazy and connect it all the way across my graph, which is just beautiful. It's the way things should be done. And so I'm going to come down. And now we can see if this is actually going to work or not. So let's go ahead, and there's probably going to be some bug because there always is. But let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. Okay, so we have successfully generated walls. Fantastic. So let's go ahead and try our south entrance and look at that. So I my camera is oddly nowhere to be seen, even though it appears. Oh, I think, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to move my camera position, right? So I've updated the camera, that's great. Or I've updated the thing, it actually drew another room, fantastic. But the camera is still where it was. So let's go ahead and stop this and figure out where our camera is going. Okay, so here's what's happening at this point. Because I'm using this on trigger enter, what's happening is that you'll see if you watch in the scene view, you're going to see that things are flickering. And what's happening is that I'm entering that collider multiple times. And so I need some way to not be entering that collider. So if I come up here, right, you can see that that camera flips back and forth several times. And that's because I'm creating this new wall with a new collider, and I'm entering that collider as soon as it is set. And then I have a bunch of walls hanging out on top of each other. Look at all these rooms in my hierarchy, right? You can see that there are problems. So on trigger enter is giving us a problem where, right, as we're entering it, then we're entering and entering, and things are ugly. What we probably want is on trigger exit. So once we've passed through this and we're on the other side, then maybe we want to do the update everything. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's click on replace and go to on trigger, and we're going to say on trigger exit 2D. Let's see if this works. If this doesn't work, then we're going to have to create a flag variable, a Boolean variable that will basically say true or false so that we don't have those multiple steps. So we've tried that. We're going to try this first. This is the simplest option. And if this doesn't work, we'll have to work on something a little bit more advanced. Okay. So let's see if as we exit, hey, look at that. The simple one. Oh, and that other room disappeared. Fantastic. So now we can cruise through. Now, there's one issue here, which is I can't see anything. So why can't I see anything? If I click on my main camera, the reason I can't see anything is because my Z is 0, right? Where this really should be is -10. And then I can see my room. So somewhere in here where I set in the game manager where the camera position gets updated, specifically right here. Let's go ahead and double click on this, right? This is a vector 3 that's getting set, and we're setting the X and Y, but we're not setting the Z. And so what we need to do is we need to set that Z value as well. So let's go ahead and say we've got this, and let's just go ahead, and we know it needs to be -10. We don't want that to change at all. So I'm just going to say new vector 3, which I spelled wrong. So new vector 3, and we want vector 3 XYZ. I'm going to set Z to -10. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add these two things together. So I'm just going to say add, and I want to do vector 3 as my addition, and I want to connect this here, and then I just want to connect this here, right? So now, right, with this additional unit here, I'm able to make sure that my Z value does not go to 0, right? Because everything else was working except I couldn't see anything in the game screen, and that's because the camera was essentially was level with all the other assets and looking past them into the distance. So let's go ahead and double click, and let's see if we've got this all working. Okay, so let's go ahead and go north. All right, I've created a new room. I can go out this side door here, go into another room, right? And my computer, with everything that I'm running on it right now, my player is lagging really hard. But if I'm going to go ahead and move this around a little bit. There we go. And then click in here so I can, right, test this again. There we go. And so far, so good. Now I'm going to let that other room disappear, right? If you were to go straight back through this, that could be a problem. Now, the other, just because, right, it's going to draw a room on top of another room, the camera's going to jump off. And so we haven't made something that stops that from happening, but what you may want to do is as soon as the character, crosses this threshold, right, as soon as the character exits, maybe you throw up a collider so they can't go back, right? And that would be something based on, how you want this to play out. Otherwise, you'd have to figure out, you'd, instead of having 3 seconds for this thing to delete, you'd want it deleted immediately, right? And it looks like, things are going pretty well. So let's see about moving our camera position, like scrolling it across rather than having it just jump where it's at. So to do that, I'm actually going to be selecting my camera, and let's see here, is the object variable? No, I think what we did, and this is how it should be, is, right, our current cam position and new camera positions are scene variables, so any object can access them. So I'm going to go back to my camera, and right, I don't need, right, I have my flow graph turned off on here. I'm going to go ahead and delete, actually I'm going to leave those things there because all of this is going to be really useful, except, right, Bobby's position. We don't want Bobby's position. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on this. I'm going to delete that. And the flow machine's currently turned off. If you don't have a flow machine on your camera, these are the units you need to create and the settings and links you need to have to start. So go ahead and pause the video, set this up, and then we will add the additional units. Okay. Okay, so you've set that up successfully. Let's go ahead and grab our new camera XY, which should come in there. There we go. And let's also grab our current camera XY. Right, so the current camera XY, which for some reason again is not, there we go, dragging in, is where we are. I have no idea why these zeros are here. There's some bug happening. That's great. So, right, our current camera is where we are. Our new camera XY is where we want to be. Currently, our code is just hopping the camera position over there. And what we want to do is we want to slowly transition from one side to the other. And so we're going to be using lerp to do that. Now, the other thing that we can do is rather than using update, right, we can make sure that we don't need to be doing this every single frame. We only need to have this action happen when that custom trigger is set. And so if I go ahead and click add unit and say custom event, right, and instead of self for the game object, what I can use is my game manager. So I'm not sure if there's if I just say game object literal and come down here and select game manager, then, right, that's the game object this is attached to. And again, that custom event is called, right, entry collide, capitalized. If I select this custom event, I don't need to know, right, I don't need any of the arguments. And if this freaks out and because it doesn't have the argument, we can add one, and then but we're just not going to use it. We are going to want this to be a coroutine because we're going to do this over time. So I want to make sure that's a coroutine. And then we are going to go ahead and select all of these units. Scoot this over. So we've got these two right here set to, getting the X and Y values out of this. Now, fortunately, we actually have the X and Y values here, but it might make sense for us to make a couple changes here. So let's go ahead and start by adding our lerp. Right, linear or interpolation, and we will do this in, let's go ahead and do this in vector 2 math, because what we'll do is we'll just feed out this one thing, or our X and Y values from this into here, and then we'll, transform that position. So let's go ahead and we're going to say, all right, so we want to start at A and go to B. So we're going to say, all right, here's A, here's B, and right, we're going to probably use a timer to do this. So let's go ahead and scoot these over a touch and right click and say add unit and just go down to time. And we are going to say timer. Cooldown might work as well, right? Because basically, we fire it off and we set the duration to 3 seconds, and then that remaining percentage should allow us to lerp over there, but we actually might want to use the elapsed. So let's go ahead and delete that. So let's just go ahead and do a normal timer with all the settings on it. So we're going to say timer, and this custom event should start our timer. Our duration should be 3 seconds, right? Because that's just what we've got on the other part. We want this tick to be what's happening here. And I'm going to delete update. And then the elapsed percent is going to be our time. And this is going to come into this get X. And this is going to come into the get Y. Right? It doesn't matter which one of those I connect first. It should just grab the Y, grab the X and grab the Y. Feed this in here and then transform the position. And so let's see if this actually works. I'm going to go ahead and just clean this up just a touch first. Okay, so let's go ahead and step out of this and let's see if we get a good event. So let's go ahead and run this. This may do terrible things. Oh, actually, this is not going to work currently. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this because, right, we're already moving the camera in the game manager. So this is where we need to make a change. Now, of course, right, we have this transform position is the object that all of these things are flowing into, which is kind of obnoxious. I wish there was just like a pass-through unit that you could use to replace this, but alas, that is not the case. So, right, we just want to set up these variables. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect to these two, and then disconnect all of these, and disconnect that one. Pull this out of the way a bit, and then I'm going to have to reconnect all of these. So I'm just going to go ahead and zoom back in here and say, okay, let's go to find game object with tag instead. Now, this, hopefully I didn't break anything, but right, I didn't do a whole lot of damage here, even if I did, because it was only one unit. So let's go ahead and double click out of this, maybe select our camera again, just so we can see if this code is actually functioning, and let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so Bob's moving. I'm going to go ahead and actually drag this over real quick, and then I'm going to go ahead and go south. And nothing happened. Oh, I have a very good idea as to why this is not working at all. The reason is I never turned this flow machine back on. So yours may have worked. I'm going to go ahead and turn the flow machine on, even though this is running. Yeah, I may have to recheck it again, or else I'm going to forget. Let's go ahead and see if the camera beautifully slides up to that position. Oh, look at that. And then right when it gets there, that other room disappears. Fantastic, right? So now we've got a way to make a very simple room. You can tell by how elaborate the code is that doing more complex things might be trickier. Now, if we were using a grid-based system and could really randomly populate where walls are at and stuff like that, it might honestly be a little bit simpler. But really what makes it hard is all the checks, right? To make sure that we've got things exactly where we want them to be. Oh, and so now, right, I'm in this room, there's only one exit, so I come back out, right? Which is a little confusing, and maybe that's something you would change, but here I am back in this space, which is a new room with different exits, and so, right, I can come out here, and my camera just nicely slides over to the next space. All right, so that's the entire tutorial. That's everything you need to know to generate rooms. And so the other next steps would be to, oops, I accidentally just created another room. I don't know what's going to happen to me. Actually, I guess I can come up here. Right, so there are some bugs. I don't even know where I am at this point, right? So ideally, I wouldn't have gone through this 2 times, but and right now the camera's going to continue moving forward. So, right, we definitely need a way to stop people from going through an entrance twice. But that's something that hopefully you can figure out how to do, right? Just basically create an object that's a child of your things that blocks those entries until you're ready to go.